Exactly 6:47 in the morning, I heard 3 sharp knocks on my back door. The kind that doesn't ask permission. I'd been awake already, sitting at the kitchen table with my second coffee, watching the February dark over Barrie reluctantly give way to grey. Winter in Ontario doesn't let go easy. Neither it turns out to the people who want to take everything from you. When I opened the door, my employee of 22 years was standing on my back step in her parka and boots, snow in her hair, her face the color of old ash. "Mr. Caraway," she said, "please don't go into the store today. Please, just trust me." I stared at her. Judith had worked for me since before my wife passed. She'd opened Caraway's fine woodworking every single morning for over 2 decades without complaint, without drama, without ever once showing up at my back door before 7 in the morning, looking like she'd swallowed glass. "Judith," I said, "what in God's name is going on?" She glanced over her shoulder toward the alley like she expected someone to be watching. "I can't explain everything right now. But please, don't go in today. Don't sign anything. Don't answer calls from your son-in-law." That last part hit me in the chest. "Is my daughter all right?" "Your daughter is fine." Her jaw tightened. "It's him I'm worried about." I'd built Caraway's fine woodworking from a single rented unit in a Barrie strip mall into a 3-location operation across Simcoe County. 41 years. Custom cabinetry, heritage restoration work, contracts with heritage properties in the region. My hands had shaped every piece of that business the same way I'd shaped wood, slowly, deliberately, with no shortcuts. My son-in-law had been with us for 6 years. My daughter had married him in that small ceremony on Lake Simcoe, when I still thought he was the kind of man who showed up early and stayed late. He did, at first, long enough to learn everything. I looked at Judith standing there in the cold and made a decision the same way I always have. Gut first, logic second. "Come in," I said. "I'll put the kettle on." She came inside but wouldn't sit down. She stood near the counter with her hands wrapped around themselves, and she said, "I overheard a phone call yesterday, after close. I was in the stockroom and I don't think he knew I was still there." "What kind of call?" he said. She stopped, pressed her lips together. "He said the papers would be ready by noon and that you'd never see it coming." "Papers? Noon? Never see it coming." I set my coffee mug down very carefully on the counter, because my hands had started to do something I didn't want them to do. "Judith," I said, "go home. I'll handle this." She shook her head. "I'm not leaving until you promise me you won't go in." "I promise," I said, and I meant it. After she left, I sat back down at the kitchen table and didn't move for a long time. The snow had started again outside, soft and indifferent, covering the yard in that particular Ontario silence that makes you feel like the rest of the world has stopped. Maybe it had. My son-in-law had been the one to suggest the business restructuring 8 months ago. I'd been tired. My knee had been giving me trouble since the autumn, and my accountant, a careful, unexcitable man named Philip, who'd done my books for 15 years, had been telling me to think about succession planning. My son-in-law had come to me with a binder, actual binder, tab sections, laminated pages. He'd done his homework, I'd give him that. The proposal was to transfer operational control of all 3 locations into a holding company, with me retaining nominal ownership but him as managing director. I'd said I needed time to think about it. He'd said, of course, no rush. That was 4 months ago. I hadn't signed anything, but I hadn't said no clearly enough either. That was my mistake. I called Philip at 8 o'clock. He answered on the second ring, which told me he'd been expecting me to call. "Philip," I said, "what do you know?" A pause. "How much do you want to know?" "Everything." "Basic." He told me that my son-in-law had been in contact with a commercial lawyer in Toronto, not our firm, a different one, and that a set of documents had been prepared that would transfer majority control of the business to the holding company effective upon signature. He had learned about it from a paralegal he knew socially who'd mentioned it offhand without knowing the connection. The documents apparently contain language that makes the transfer look like a tax optimization strategy, Philip said carefully. Someone reading them quickly, without counsel, might not immediately understand what they were signing. He was going to bring them to me today, I said. That's what I was afraid of. I hung up and sat very still for a moment. Then I called my daughter. She answered on the 4th ring. Her voice had that careful quality it gets when she's been crying and doesn't want me to know. "Dad, that." Are you at home? Yes. Yes. Is he there? A beat of silence. He left early. He said he had a morning meeting. I know about the paper, sweetheart. The silence this time was different. Longer. When she finally spoke, her voice had gone very small. Dad, I didn't know what they were for. He told me it was estate planning. He asked me to. She stopped. He asked me to encourage you to sign them. Something in my chest went very quiet, not angry, just quiet. Did you know what you were encouraging me to sign? No. She said it fast. I swear to you, I didn't. I thought it was about. He said it was about protecting the business if something happened to you. He said your accountant had recommended it. Philip recommended nothing of the kind. She started to cry then. Not the careful kind. The kind that's been held in for a while. He's been different, she said. Since last spring. Since you told him you were thinking of giving the Innisfil location to the apprentices. That stopped me. 8 months ago, I had mentioned, offhand, over dinner, that I'd been considering a cooperative model for the Innisfil shop, letting the senior craftsman buy in gradually. I thought it was a good idea. I hadn't realized my son-in-law had heard it as a threat. Stay home today, I told my daughter. Don't answer his calls. I'll come to you this afternoon. By 10 o'clock, I'd reached my lawyer, a woman named Caroline who had once told me, when I thanked her for her directness, that she considered vagueness a moral failing. She was at my kitchen table by 11 with her reading glasses and a yellow legal pad. Tell me everything, she said, and I did. While I talked, she wrote. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me over her glasses. He's made a significant error, she said. What kind? He had those documents prepared by a Toronto firm that doesn't operate in Ontario's commercial space often enough to know that certain transfer language triggers mandatory independent legal advice requirements under provincial guidelines. If he tried to have you sign today without counsel present, the whole thing would be unenforceable regardless. He didn't know that. Clearly not. She almost smiled. But there's more. He filed a holding company registration 3 weeks ago. There's a paper trail. And if Philip has documentation of the misrepresentation to your accountant, he does, then we have more than enough to go on the offensive. At 12:15, my phone rang. My son-in-law. I let it ring. It rang again at 12:22, then again at 12:40. At 12:51, he called from a number I didn't recognize, which told me he'd figured out I wasn't answering deliberately. At 1:30, he showed up at my front door. I watched him through the front window for a moment before I opened it. He was standing on the step in his good coat, the charcoal one he wore when he wanted to look serious, with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. He looked composed. He always looked composed. That had impressed me once. Now I understood it differently. I opened the door. I've been trying to reach you, he said. His voice was even, practiced. I know. I have some documents I'd like to go through with you. It won't take long. He held up the portfolio. The restructuring proposal we discussed. We didn't discuss it, I said. You proposed it? I said I'd think about it. Something shifted in his face, just slightly. Of course, I only meant. Caroline is here, I said. The shift happened again, more visible this time. You're a lawyer? Come in. He came in. He sat down across from Caroline and me at the kitchen table, and he set the portfolio down, and he did not open it. Caroline looked at him pleasantly. I understand you've had documents prepared regarding a transfer of operational control of Callaway's Fine Woodworking to a holding company. It's a standard restructuring arrangement. Can I see the documents? He opened the portfolio and slid them across. Caroline picked them up and read without hurry. My son-in-law watched her with a stillness that reminded me of an animal that knows it's been seen. These are unenforceable as drafted, she said, setting them back down. But I think you know that's not the primary issue here. I don't know what you mean. The issue is that you misrepresented the nature of these documents to your father-in-law and to his daughter. That you had a holding company registered in anticipation of a transfer of assets you had no right to. That you approached your wife without her full understanding of the situation to act as an intermediary. She folded her hands on the table. That's a pattern that has a name. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a snowplow ground its way down the street, and the sound of it seemed very far away. I deserve to be part of this company, he said finally. The practiced evenness was gone from his voice. What was underneath, it was rawer than I expected. I've given 6 years to this business. I know every supplier, every client, every contract. And you were going to hand the Innisfil location to people who've been here 3 years. I was thinking about it, I said. I hadn't decided. But you didn't even mention it to me. He looked at me then directly, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Not cunning, but hurt. Real hurt, underneath all the calculation. You didn't ask what I thought. You didn't consider what I'd been building toward. You just assumed I wasn't part of the future of this place. I looked at my son-in-law for a long time. I thought about my daughter. I thought about the 6 years he'd actually given, which were real regardless of what he'd done with them. I thought about how a man can let resentment grow so slowly he doesn't notice it's become something else entirely. What you did was wrong, I said. You tried to take something that wasn't yours through deception. You involved my daughter without her knowledge. You built something behind my back that could have cost me everything I've spent 41 years building. He didn't deny it. But I also hear you, I said. And I'm going to tell you something I should have said months ago. You were never invisible to me. I just assumed you knew that without me saying it. That was my failure. Caroline looked at me. My son-in-law looked at me. That doesn't change what has to happen next, I said. You understand that. He nodded slowly. I know. What happened next took 3 weeks and a great deal of paperwork. My son-in-law resigned from his position as operations manager. He and my daughter began a difficult process that I stayed out of as much as they would let me, which wasn't much. She came to my house often in those weeks, and we sat in the kitchen and drank tea and sometimes didn't say much. I let her lead. Caroline filed the necessary documentation to dissolve the holding company registration. Philip conducted a full audit of the business accounts, which turned up nothing missing. My son-in-law had been preparing to take, not stealing, and I was grateful for that small mercy. Judith came back to work the Monday after all of it, the same as always. I met her at the back door with a coffee, and she looked at me the way she always has. Direct, no fuss, and said, "Everything sorted." "Getting there," I said. "Good." She took the coffee. "I've got a heritage restoration court to finish by 3. I promoted her to operations manager the following month. She argued with me about the salary for 20 minutes before accepting it, which is the most Judith thing that has ever happened. The Innisfil cooperative is moving forward. I met with the senior craftsmen in March, and we've started the process of structured buy-in. It's slower than I'd like and more complicated than I'd hoped, but that's always been true of anything worth doing. My daughter is still walking through everything. There are days she seems lighter and days she seems like she's carrying something I can't help her set down. I don't push, I keep the kettle ready. I think about what Judith said that February morning on my back step, "Just trust me." And I think about the fact that she risked our 22-year relationship to say it. She didn't know how I'd react. She didn't know if I'd believe her. She came anyway. There's a lesson in that I've been turning over ever since. The people who show up at the back door in the cold, when it costs them something, those are the ones worth listening to. Not because they're always right, but because they're there. I'm 68 years old. I've made furniture that has outlasted marriages and moved across provinces and been handed down to children who never met me. I've learned that wood, like trust, has grain. It tells you which way it wants to go if you pay attention. Force it wrong and it splits. I should have paid more attention to the grain of my son-in-law's resentment. I should have asked the questions I was too busy to ask. I won't make that mistake again. But I also know this. I built Callaway's fine woodworking with my own hands, one careful joint at a time. No one is going to take it from me through paperwork I didn't read or promises I didn't agree to. Not while I'm still here to open the door. And if someone knocks before 7 in the morning telling you not to sign anything, put the kettle on and listen. The people who love you sometimes know what's coming before you do. I still think about Judith standing on that back step in the February cold, snow in her hair, risking 22 years of working relationship on a conversation she wasn't sure I'd believe. She didn't have to do it. That's the part I keep coming back to. She could have gone home, told herself it wasn't her business, told herself I was a grown man who could handle my own affairs. She had every practical reason to stay quiet. And she came anyway. What she did that morning wasn't complicated. It was just honest. She saw something wrong and she said so, even when saying so cost her something. I've been in business for over 4 decades, and I can tell you that kind of straightforwardness is rarer than any skill I've ever hired for. You can teach someone to read a balance sheet. You cannot teach them to knock on a door at 6:47 in the morning because their conscience won't let them stay home. My son-in-law was not a stupid man. He understood contracts, client relationships, supplier networks. He'd learned the business well enough to know exactly which documents would be hardest for me to pass quickly, exactly which language would blur the line between estate planning and asset transfer. That intelligence, turned in the wrong direction, merely cost me everything I'd spent 41 years building. Because cleverness without integrity isn't an asset. It's a liability waiting to surface. I've thought about what I could have done differently. I should have been clearer earlier about my plans for Innisfil, about what I saw in him, about what I hoped he'd grow into. I assumed he knew he mattered to the future of this business. I assumed he could read my intentions the way I read grain in wood, by looking closely, by paying attention. I didn't say it plainly enough, and resentment filled the space where the conversation should have been. That's on me. A man who builds things for a living should know that silence isn't structure. It just looks like structure until something puts weight on it. But here is what I also know. My son-in-law made choices. Real ones, over weeks, with time to reconsider at every step. He chose the folder and the forged rationale and the Toronto lawyer who didn't know Ontario commercial law well enough to protect him from himself. He chose to bring my daughter into it without telling her the truth. Those choices came from somewhere. From hurt, from feeling overlooked, from wanting something he didn't know how to ask for directly. But hurt doesn't make the choices for you. You still make them yourself. Judith made hers too. Caroline made hers. Philip picked up the phone on the second ring, knowing the conversation wasn't going to be easy. What I've learned at 68 is that the people around you are always making choices you can't see. The question is whether you've built a life, a business, a family, a way of being that makes it easier for them to choose honestly. I hadn't entirely, but I'm trying now. The Innisfil cooperative is moving forward. My daughter is finding her footing. Judith runs operations the same way she's always done everything, thoroughly, without fuss, without needing to be thanked more than once. I still have the same kettle. I keep it ready.